Okay, so welcome to another lesson in epidemiology. This time we're going to be talking about diseases. So, in this presentation, we're going to be talking about three different things. First would be the theories of disease causation, basically the history of how humans perceived disease throughout the years. And then you have number two, your communicable diseases, and number three, non communicable diseases. So, let's start with the theories of disease causation. Starting, of course, with the pre-modern era. So in the pre-modern era, most theories involve unseen entities or unpleasant sensory experiences, and I'm sure you're going to or you've heard of these theories because in the Philippines, it's still well not widely practiced, but it's still widely believed in. So we have your spiritual theories. So your spiritual theories basically states that your disease come from or your diseases come from unseen spirits. So you have your demonic theory, which states that evil spirits, witches, and demons could cause disease, basically vengeful spirits or those that want to cause harm to humans. And then you have your punitive theory. From the root word itself, it is a punishment from a supreme being. So these two theories are spiritual, meaning that they root from unseen forces causing disease into or to humans. So this has widely been debunked, but since in the Philippines and in some other countries that are still very superstitious, it's still very widely believed. Then we move on to something more reasonable. You have your theories by Hippocrates. So you have your miasma theory, which is also sometimes referred to as your bad air theory, which states that certain objects in the world have this miasma, or basically an aura that surrounds it that could cause disease when it contacts your body or when it is inhaled through your nose. And then he also came up with humorism, which basically states that health is determined by the four humors of the human body. And I'm sure you're familiar with the four humors of the human body. So just to give you a refresher, we have four different humors according to Hippocrates. You have your yellow bile, you have your black bile, you have your blood, and your phlegm. Now, notably, humorism is also one of the first theories of disease that associated certain parts of our body or certain humors of our human body to the environment and to the different temperatures or the different seasons. So, in this wheel, the four humors would be associating, for example, your yellow bile, it associates it to hot and dry, and this is usually abundant during our childhood, and it's also associated with fire. So, Hippocrates stated that if there is an imbalance in the four humors of the human body, then there is what we know as disease. But we do know that humorism is already debunked and it's not considered to be factual anymore. But at time period, it was one of the more prominent theories of disease. Uh, in fact, there is even a game that was used, or rather, that's based on the four humors of the human body. So, if you want, you could check it out. Um, it's nice. It's like Papers, Please. It's like that customer service kind of game, but it's based on the four humors of the human body. And if you want to learn more about humorism, then I think that gamification of the concept is one of the best representations of humorism. Okay, so then we move on to after the theories of Hippocrates and your spiritual theories, you have the modern theories. So the modern theories of disease causation was basically is when we discovered that specific agents or microorganisms could cause disease, and that started with the germ theory of disease. So, in the germ theory of disease, microorganisms must be found in all organisms that exhibit a certain disease. So, that's one of the four postulates of Robert Koch. So, He came up with four postulates. And by the way, Robert Koch is not the only one who came up with this, or is not the only proponent of this theory. You also have the works of Louis Pasteur, Agostino Bassi, and Ignaz Semmelweis. So there are plenty of proponents that believed in the germ theory of disease, and plenty of works from them helped establish the germ theory of disease. So again, one of the four postulates is that microorganisms must be found in all organisms exhibiting the disease. The second being that it must be isolated from the organism and it can be grown in pure culture. Number three is that the cultured microorganism must be able to cause disease to a healthy organism. So basically, you have your organism over here, and then you have to be able to isolate the microorganism from here and grow it in a culture media. So once it grows, you can use that growth and inoculate it in another organism, which would then be ill or afflicted with the same disease. And it turns into a cycle, so that means that now the ill organism or the newly inoculated organism that develops the disease, you can isolate the microorganism here and grow it in pure culture again, and then repeat the same process over and over again to confirm that the microorganisms in fact cause the disease. Okay, so together with this, you have the biomedical theory of disease that states basically that the human body is a perfectly functioning machine and that disease comes from a malfunctioning system. So there's not really much to say about this aside from the fact that it considers that homeostasis is destroyed when we have disease. So basically, our organs are considered to be a machine, and that if one part of the machine malfunctions, then the whole body system or the whole body develops disease. Okay. Next, we have the epidemiological triad. So, this is one of the first modern theories of disease that consider the environment as part of what causes disease. We had this idea that it's either the host or a malfunction in the host caused the disease, and the agent from our germ theory. But in this epidemiologic triad, we considered also the environment to be part of the disease. And we tend to visualize this as sort of like a seesaw, where the environment is the fulcrum that holds the agent and the host in perfect balance. So this also adds the benefit of that when you visualize this and in the environment is in favor of the host, so meaning the fulcrum would move to a point closer to the host, then the host is going to move up and the agent is going to move down. So that means that the environment favors the host, and therefore the host is stronger than the agent, and there is a small likelihood that the host is going to develop a disease. However, if the environment is dirty, if the environment favors the growth of the microorganism, meaning that your fulcrum is closer to the agent, then your agent is going to move up. So let me just delete a few of these so to make the visualization easier. So the agent is going to move up and the host is going to move down. So that means then that the environment favors the agent and therefore the agent can cause disease to the host. So the epidemiological triad again considers the agent, the host, and the environment in disease causation. Then you have your multifactorial causation and the web of causation. So I kind of group this together because they are quite similar. Basically, your multifactorial causation and your web of causation considers all the different variables that could lead to disease. So it's not just the host, the environment, and the agent anymore. We consider all variables like uh, the psychological factors, the economic factors, the cultural factors. So there are many different aspects that cause disease. So At this point in time, we were aware about the different states of emotion of a human being, but we were not yet associating with disease. So your multifactorial causation and web of causation is actually one of the theories that considered all the different factors that could lead to disease. Okay, so that would be sort of everything that needs to be said about this. If there's anything more, this theory was mainly the multifactorial causation is mainly by Max von Pettenkofer. So he is here. And then the web of causation was developed by McMahon, Pugh, and Ibsen. And this was around 1960. Okay. But the concept mainly the same. Okay. Next, you have your Rotman's component causes. Now, this is referred to as your wheel of disease causation, but for the core of it is we have Rotman's causal pies. So basically, we have what we refer to Rotman, or rather, um, separated causes into two different kinds. So you have your necessary cause and your, as you see here, sufficient causes. So when you say necessary cause, these are causes that are needed or absolutely needed for every type of disease presentation. So for instance, in these three different presentations of the disease, you have your letter A. So for a disease to be present, a necessary cause needs to be present. And a sufficient cause, therefore, is a cause. Imagine the web of causation, so the different variables, the different factors that can lead to disease. So a sufficient cause is something that would allow our necessary cause to infect the host. So basically you're saying that we are saying here that you have a necessary cause, but the necessary cause cannot infect or cannot afflict the host unless the sufficient causes are met. So, sufficient causes can be different for every presentation of the disease, as illustrated in this example. So, you have your necessary cause A, and then you have different sufficient causes. But ultimately, these three causal pies would have the same disease, disease A. Okay, so that would be Rotman's component causes and causal pies. Okay, so our next topic would be communicable diseases, and we have four different communicable diseases or four different um, agents that could cause disease. Of course, you're very familiar with bacteria. These are prokaryotic organisms that carry and release toxins through metabolism or death. So sometimes you could um, you could get infected by a bacteria or a group of bacteria, and they would produce toxins that they then would release through their metabolism, and that would cause disease. However, there are plenty of bacteria that when they die, they're going to release the toxins, and these toxins could stay in your hands, could stay somewhere. Basically, we're going to talk about this later. Could stay in fomites and can transfer into your food, or it could transfer into an open part of your body, like for example, an open wound, and could infect your um, could infect the host. But in this case, if the microorganism is dead, then there is no way for it to reproduce, so therefore it would be mostly self-limiting. Next, you have viruses, which are strands of RNA and DNA enclosed in a simple protein shell known as a capsid. So, viruses is unique in that it is acellular, meaning it is not a cell on its own. It's just a strand of DNA and RNA, genetic material, that needs a host cell to replicate. So basically, these are not considered to be living organisms until they are inside the host. And then you have your fungi, which is a non-photosynthetic organism with cell walls. This can be either classified as a mold or a yeast. So molds are typically the ones that grow fruiting bodies, and then yeast are usually bacteria-like. So they resemble bacteria both in their microscopic state and in their colony forms in pure culture. Okay, so very diverse, and also it's closer to plants than it is to bacteria or any fungi, or viruses. And then you have your parasites. In this case, since we're talking about microorganisms, we limited it to protozoa. There are parasites, of course, that are worms, nematodes, cestodes, and the like. But for the purpose of this discussion, we're only going to limit it to protozoa. So, protozoa are eukaryotic cells that cause disease by parasitizing the host. So, basically, when we say a parasitic relationship, we are, or rather, the agent is feeding off of the human body. So, it does not give us any benefit. In fact, it harms the human body while it thrives inside of us. So, a parasite, a protozoans could be flagellates, could be ciliates. They're single celled microorganisms that, of course, infect humans. Not just humans, of course, but for the purpose of our discussion, humans. Okay, so on its own, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites cannot really infect us because we need to, or they need to reach us first. So, how exactly do these microorganisms reach us? Let's talk about the different modes of transmission. So, you have direct and indirect. Let's start with direct transmission. Okay, so let's talk about the modes of direct transmission. So you have direct droplet transmission, which are respiratory droplets that are too heavy to stay airborne for long periods of time, meaning that when a person coughs, so let's imagine this is a mouth. When a person coughs, the person spreads respiratory droplets. So these are tiny particles that are too heavy to stay airborne for long periods of time. So eventually they're going to drop off. Their trajectory is usually going down, and unfortunately, what a lot of people don't realize is that when a person coughs or sneezes, the respiratory droplets could travel long distances. And so, if a person is present within that range of the cough and the sneeze, and they are at risk of inhaling, or ingesting, or introducing the pathogen from the cough or the cold or the sneeze through their mucosa. Okay. Next, you have direct contact transmission, which occurs through direct contact with the reservoir. So this is exactly direct contact. So when you have, for example, a person that's infected with the disease could be considered a reservoir, and then you come into contact with that person, you can get infected. Next, you have animal bites, which is spread through the bite of an infected animal. Now, the key term here is infected animal. Now, I mentioned that because a lot of people believe that, for example, a dog bites a person. And then usually people would say if the dog goes crazy, then the dog has rabies. But the problem with that is the reason why the dog bit the person in the first place is because the dog already has rabies. So the craziness happened before the dog even bit the person. So usually, dogs are not born with rabies. Usually, cats are not born with rabies. Animals in general are not born with rabies. They are transmitted through animal bites. So that means that your dog, especially a domesticated dog that does not leave the house, does not have rabies. However, if a wild animal, a wild dog, a stray cat, a stray bat bites your dog, then there is a possibility that your dog develops rabies. So the craziness triggered the bite. It's not the bite that triggers the craziness. So we have it the other way around. And that kind of irks me because that assumes that all dogs have rabies, and then if they bite you, they go crazy, then they have rabies. But it's the other way around. They bit you because they were already infected with rabies, and rabies is a brain-eating virus. Eating perhaps is not the best term, but to visualize it better, it sort of infects your brain. And that triggers the dog to be aggressive, and so the dog bites other persons. Okay, so I just wanted to clear that up, get it off my chest. And just so we're clear, again, dogs are not born with rabies. So the reason why, for example, you get bitten by a puppy and then you get injections or shots is because we're worried about tetanus. And since we're already injecting you with anti-tetanus, we, of course, would want to be safer and inject your anti-rabies together with that. Okay? So, clear as day. Next, we have the unfortunate direct transmission of transplacental. So, transplacental is basically when the infant is exposed through the body of an infected mother. And this is very common with blood-borne diseases, where the infant, of course, shares the blood of the mother during its earlier years, during the time when it's still inside the body, and then when it passes through her birth canal, then a load of the virus or the bacteria or whatever is in there could infect the infant. So that is what we refer to as a transplacental infection. So a common example of this would be mothers with HIV. Of course, when they give birth to their child, then the child is well at risk of developing HIV as well. So next we have the modes of oh why does it not go next? Wait. What? Okay, so I figured it out, got to the next slide. Anyways, modes of indirect transmission. So, biological transmission and mechanical transmission. So, biological transmission is through living vectors such as mosquitoes and ticks that carry diseases to humans, whereas your mechanical transmission is transmitted through a mechanical vector or an inanimate object. So, basically, biological transmission is when vectors such as mosquitoes and ticks carry diseases to humans, whereas mechanical transmission, we refer to it as a mechanical vector or an inanimate vehicle. Okay, again, vehicle. A vector is usually used to refer to um, something that carries the disease but is not infected with it, or something that carries the disease on the outside of its body. So, unlike living vectors like mosquitoes and ticks, they are actually part of the lifespan of whatever infects them, um, which means whatever is infecting them is inside their bodies. Whereas a mechanical vector, it can also be a living organism. However, these are typically carriers of the disease outside of their body. So basically, for example, let's consider a fly that lands to human feces and then eventually would land on our food that would cause then disease. So again, outside of their body, whereas your living vectors have the host or sorry, or have the agent inside their bodies. Lastly, we have non-communicable diseases. So non-communicable diseases are otherwise referred to as chronic diseases, particularly because they are long-term and they are usually incurable. So this could be genetic, so this could be lifestyle related. So these are non-communicable diseases because they cannot be transmitted from person to person or from animal to person and so on. So these are diseases that are developed in the human body from birth or from lifestyle choices that could then cause the disease. A very good example of this would be high blood pressure, could be type 2 diabetes, could be lung cancer, could be colon cancer. So these are chronic diseases that are developed over long periods of time through poor lifestyle choices. Okay, so this is the last slide. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new. Now, I do encourage everyone, of course, to explore further into the different mechanisms of diseases and the different ways where an agent could reach a host. So, in fact, a lot of our student researchers right now are studying different modes of transmission. They're focusing on public health, the different spreads of diseases, the risk of developing a disease if you stay in a certain area for a long period of time. And that is a very impactful study, considering that, of course, we're trying to look at it from the perspective of public health. Okay, so once again, thank you for watching. Leave a like, leave a comment if you have questions, and I'll see you next time.